Hello, beloved. I am Pastor VictorResendiz. Welcome to this weekly series called God is Love, conversations on compassion, justice, and spirituality. Each week, we will explore our role as Christian believers in today's national dialogue around race and racism. We'll be joined by Liz Peterson, Assistant Director of Houston Coalition Against Hate, a network of organizations, institutions, and individuals committed to preventing and addressing all forms of hate in our community. We invite you to listen for the transforming Word of God, as together we seek to fully embody the great commandment to love God and love neighbor. Well, hello, everyone. We are here on our fourth conversation. And just like last week, we had a special guest. Well, today we have another special guest. And I'm so honored to have Dr. Brad Morgan with us, our senior pastor of Memorial Drive United Methodist Church. And Dr. Morgan has been with us almost 5 years. 5 years, I'm sorry.
5 years. Maybe it feels like 5 years,
yeah,
or 5 minutes.
Like, I'm sure if you ask him, it probably feels like 5 years with everything that's been going on in the midst of this pandemic. So 5 months, actually. But it for me, it has felt like that he's been with us quite a while. He has just been phenomenal in just getting on board and leading us through this pandemic, the soft introduction back to the building, our face-to-face Sunday services, and so many things that are kind of moving pieces slowly but surely. But he's done a phenomenal job. So welcome, Dr. Morgan, to God is Love Conversations. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, Victor, thank you so much for asking me to be part of this and to be able to participate. It's such a joy. And please, as you know, you can call me Brad or Pastor Brad, please, just first names only. You were saying Dr. Morgan, and I was like, oh, wow, is there somebody else around here? So yeah. Please just go with that. It's such a joy to be here with you and to meet Liz, albeit virtually, and to be able to share with you. If I've done anything, as far as helping lead the church through these troubled times, it's because there's amazing people on staff like yourself who make that so easy. So thank you so much for all you've done to help me acclimatize myself and to become part of these important conversations that are hopefully shaping lives more into the image of Christ. Into this kind of new awareness and helpful participation and helping make sure that we are indeed engaged in the transformation of our world into something better and more closely aligned with what God had in mind.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those words.
So well said.
Yeah. And well, Liz, welcome back. I know you started becoming this dynamic duo of the God is Love conversation. So not too long ago, I was looking at our first conversation. So we are progressing in our dynamic. So I'm glad to say that. So we're becoming a little bit more fluent. So today you have another education piece for us based on group dynamics, as you could see on the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor and let you take over.
I do, and I'm thinking about our first session as well, because I have another video to show us, and I think I figured out how to make it so everyone can hear me. But if we can't, the visual is what's really important anyway, and so we're just going to muscle on through. So thank you so much. So yes, today we are going to talk about group dynamics, and we're going to almost everything of what I'm taking is coming out of one of my very favorite books, Disunity in Christ, Uncovering the Hidden Forces That Keep Us Apart by Christina Cleveland. I highly recommend it to anybody who's listening as a Christian who's interested in moving into the anti-racism, racial justice, social justice space. It transformed my mind. When I think I had told this story earlier in our session of the 25 slide PowerPoint. I know you can't believe I would make 25 slides and really heavily rely on PowerPoint, but I had this plan, and then I read this book and I was like, oh my gosh, like all these mistakes that she's pointing out that white Christians make when they approach racial justice, like I made all of them in this one little presentation. And so I love her work, and we can't focus on all of it, but what we're going to focus on is the group dynamics. So it seems strange to say we're going to focus on the group, but let me talk about ourselves. But the question of who am I is a super important one, because social psychologists believe that the need to know ourselves is one of our primary motivations in life. So to the extent that we believe that good, valuable, positive things are what lie within our identity, the better we feel about ourselves. And this is really important because maintaining high self-esteem is another one of our primary motivations. So if you're anywhere in the education psychology world, you've heard of Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. He actually went so far as to suggest that self-esteem is just as basic a need for us as food and water. So when we think about self-esteem and how it works in a group dynamic, we understand that the actions that we take when we're in groups like churches or neighborhood groups or clubs, any group that you belong to, the way that you behave within that group is tied to your self-esteem. And so when it comes to group membership, we do 4 things to maintain our positive self-esteem. We'll gravitate toward and form groups with similar others. We engage in what's called group serving biases that defend the group's positive identity. So we love our church. We think we go to the best church. We especially if we have a Sunday school, I'm involved. It doesn't have to be the church setting. I'm involved in a young professional leaders group that did a cohort, that does yearly cohorts of trainers. And anytime we all get together, it's like 2018 best class, 2017 best class. You have this class identity, and that's how you form group cohesion, and that's totally normal. We also try to increase our status by associating with higher status groups and by distancing ourselves from lower status groups. And that just depends on what your group is. For example, my daughter just started first grade, has decided that she only wears dresses. I have a feeling that not every single girl in her elementary school or her grade or even her class only wears dresses. I have a feeling she's noticed that who she perceives to be the higher status kiddos are the ones wearing dresses. And so that's how she wants to associate herself so that she can feel good about herself. She has great self-esteem in general, so I'm not worried about it. It's a natural process that's playing out. But we'll distance ourselves from lower status groups. For example, I asked her, well, you could wear pants sometimes, right? She's like, well, only like some girls don't wear pants, or some girls wear pants, but they're not girly girls, and I want to be a girly girl. I'm a girly girl. And so she's distancing herself from whom she perceives to be somehow different or lower status than her. And so if all else fails, we'll disparage lower status groups to elevate perceptions of our own. Now, I don't think that that's what my daughter was doing when she made the comparison of girls who wear dresses to girls who wear pants. But I know that mean girl behavior comes out sometimes, and sometimes it will be said, ew, you're wearing pants. Like, well, you're not really a girl, or you're not my kind of girl. And usually, if that happens to our children, what do we tell them? That somebody's saying that to make themselves feel better. So it's important for us to then take that information that we know about just people, just what it is to be a human, and realize that we also unconsciously play out those group dynamics within more complicated spaces, like within our church family, and then also with the racial and social economic and class and ability status and all kinds of ways that our identities are we talked about marginalized or oppressed versus being valued in our society. All these dynamics are going on all the time. And so it's important for us as Christians to be mindful. When we're mindful, then we can notice group dynamics and make choices about how we will move through this space. So I also wanted to point out a really great quote from her. She says, our need for affirmation creates a greater desire to surround ourselves with those who subscribe to our culturally distinct ways of life, and an aversion to those whose mere difference threatens our unstable identities. And she's talking about this in reference to that oft-quoted statistic that the most segregated time of the week is Sunday morning at 11 o'clock when we worship in our churches that often are homogenous. Memorial Drive is not unlike that, and it's not bad that we're unlike this. It's not unexpected. I mean, we particularly, as she points out in the book, we as a people often church shop now. Maybe in the 50s or 60s, you just went to the closest church, the neighborhood or town church that was your denomination. Now we have a lot more mobility. And so we can select those churches where we feel comfortable. In fact, at Memorial Drive, you have the option of selecting, do you feel like dressing up and having a more formal service, or do you feel like wearing jeans and eating bagels and drinking coffee and worshiping in an informal way? We offer multiple cultural contexts. But this is why, this group dynamic is one reason why when we look around, we're like, why does everybody here look like us? It's a thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing, unless, she points out, something that happens is called group polarization. So this is, again, inevitable. Well, not inevitable, but just a totally normal human process that we need to be mindful of, or it will happen. So she says, the more we spend time with people who are essentially identical to us, the more we become convinced that our way of relating to both Jesus and the world is the correct way. Over time, our convictions grow stronger and our attitudes toward different ideas and cultural expressions of worship become more negative. And in the absence of diverse influences, homogenous group members tend to adopt more extreme and narrow-minded thinking as time passes. So what does this mean? I mean, I'm sure, Dr. Morgan, you've never tried to like insert new hymns into the
Sure.
the situation, the regular rotation, or the tone of voice that someone uses when they read. What passages are selected? I know there are some churches that are very tied to the lectionary, and some that, like Memorial Drive, are not.
Liz, are you telling me Jesus isn't white?
He was not white.
He was not, right? I mean, I think it kind of gets to the core of that issue, and what can be challenging for people sometimes, especially who grew up multi-generationally in a church. They don't see kind of anything wrong with the way they're not really doing what the Bible describes or says. From some very base ways, we often confuse practice and comfort for the gospel instead of the actual deep work of kind of being countercultural and kind of breaking through or trying to get past some of the natural tribal tendencies of our humanity. And I'm kind of glad you're mentioning this. In our study I'm leading on Romans, I'm really pulling out and demonstrating Paul's first century Jewish dudeness are my three defining characteristics of him, and trying to show people that if you understand him in that way, some of the things that he's lining out in Romans really try to, because of who Jesus is, break past those preferential barriers or the limits that Maslow's hierarchy of needs would place on our humanity, and go further than that to do something different, and that challenge to be more than just our base kind of primitive ways of being. And I think that's an essential kind of component to the gospel. So I'm kind of glad to hear you bringing these out, and definitely the penalty of the absence of diverse influences. It's one of the reasons why I think being engaged not only cross-culturally in our own places, but really viewing global Christianity as such an important kind of thing for us to continually bring to the table as pastors, to help people see a kind of a more global view of the kingdom of God.
Absolutely. And I can't tell you how happy I am to hear you say that, because it's hard, I know, in leadership to challenge the notion, well, we've always done it this way, and I really like it, and I always go to church at this time and sit in this pew and pray this way. And act this way, and I've always done it. And what people hear you when you say that, people that hear I'm bad, I'm wrong, goes right back. Where were we? To the self-esteem issue.
Right.
And that is the self-esteem issue is probably the number one barrier to racial justice in the United States. I'm making that up, but I think I think that that's I think that there's at least a grain of truth to that, because a lot of people do not have overtly racist views or a desire to overtly harm someone of a different race. It's that perceived threat to our own identity and our own self-esteem when we start talking about issues of racism that then makes us push back or refuse to engage. And then the conversation is over. So
right. Well, Liz, I mean, I think you're nailing something that I've seen many times in my ministry, where I've been would give a sermon on the issue of race, and be surprised about how well received it was on the way out the door. And I asked Laura, my wife Laura, I was like, Laura, do you think anybody actually heard what I was saying? She said, oh, Brad, they don't think they're racists. They don't see things, because people confuse kindness for not being a racist. So in their mind, if I can be kind to someone, if I can be hospitable, I'm not somehow participating in systems of racism that are all around us and are evident when anyone seriously studies the statistics of it. And so how do we bridge the gap between the two seems to be the challenge, because we're not trying to say in these dialogues, I mean, there are the overt kind of horrible settings where we see this manifested, certainly in some of the most recent things in media. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to find out, how do we mobilize people who are compassionate, kind, and like-minded to begin to engage in that deep work of helping the system change to reflect the values we claim we have, right? I mean, I don't think many people today are trying to, I mean, there are people claiming a kind of a race-based theology or movement, but I don't think they're going to feel very comfortable on a Sunday morning at Memorial Drive. I think for the most part, it's more of how do we break out of any form of apathy or kind of unawareness to become aware of those systems, and how do we engage them in a meaningful way. So I think your understanding of the group polarization and what it leads to and what you're bringing forward here, I mean, you're really hitting the meat of the work we're trying to do. Part of my background in work was up in Texarkana through the Arklatex lectures, where we partnered with SMU, and we were able to bring in some speakers, educate pastors, create some cross-racial dialogue, and even have members of the police department and come attend. We were primarily working on reconciliation and racial reconciliation in a time of violence, and how to do that. We've been kind of working through that for the last 3 years at some levels to try to find out how do we at least create positive conversations that could yield, outcomes and results and shifts in the way of policing in that community. And to the credit of the police department, they had really taken in and done some things that were pretty community policing, and trying to recruit and retain and train more African-American police officers in their police force. In that community, it was about 60-40 white African-American, a substantially higher population of African-Americans than in the rest of like the state of Texas. It looks more like Arkansas up there. But they were really taking some good measures. So I was really pleased to see the difference an institution like the church could help be a catalyst in those conversations. We don't get really any, I mean, like, not trying to take credit for other people's great work, but we could be a place that helped facilitate some of that opportunity for those conversations to occur. And maybe some just awareness. I mean, I think so much of it's about helping people open their eyes to the obvious.
Yes.
and that's a thing that seems kind of undervalued now. And then, you know, there's a little another piece of it, but anyway, we'll get into the personal stuff later. But yeah, was this the last slide, or there
Oh, no,
more?
no, no, no.
Oh, I want to see the more. I'm
Okay.
kind of excited about.
All
what you're
right, all
presenting
right.
here.
Yes, we can go on. This is the video slide, and we're
Yeah.
gonna cross our fingers, say a little prayer that it works. Now, how do I play in presenter mode? Give me just a minute, folks.
Yeah.
Slideshow. There we go.
I think I even know the clip. Oh, there you go.
Liz,
Yes.
the volume was low on it again. So what I'll do is I'll just grab the clip from the, I'm pretty sure you found it on YouTube. I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll just post it on the comment area so that way it'll people can click on it. Yeah, but for some reason the volume didn't come out as it should.
Well, I thought I'd figured it out, but I didn't.
Yeah.
But I can narrate it. For those of you who don't remember or haven't seen Dead Poets Society, Robin Williams is the teacher who comes into a very sedate, conservative in the sense of ritual and routine and values, private school, and he's the English teacher, and he kind of shakes things up, and he encourages the boys to think outside of the box that maybe their family lineage had handed them. And in this clip, he has three of the young men start off walking together. As you noticed, they start out walking on their own pace, but within half a circle, they are now walking in step with each other as if they were in a military or marching band. And then they begin to even exaggerate the fact that they are in step with each other. And then the boys who are watching begin to clap. Nobody instructs them to clap. You can see them looking around at each other like, why am I? Okay, well, we're clapping. And now we're clapping like, really, we're clapping, we're into this. And Robin Williams, as the teacher, when he ends the lesson, says, did you notice they all started off at their same pace? He describes the pace, and then but then they were all marching together, and the boys were like, oh yeah, that's true. And he says, you probably think you would have done something differently. Well, ask yourself, why were you clapping? And I just think it's such a beautiful illustration of how easy it is to just start going along with the crowd and keep everyone happy without realizing what you're doing. They can see that their teacher is happy that they're doing that, and so they may begin slowly, but then they adopt it enthusiastically, whether or not they thought it was the most fun little exercise they'd ever been in. And so you can see the way that peer pressure plays into our behavior. You can see the way the illusion of unanimity can present itself in a group. And you don't want to seem like the odd one out. Now, I noticed that not everyone was clapping, but in that, as you know, you depending on your level of self-esteem is your comfort level with not doing what the rest of the group does. And I tell this story to think about the phenomenon of groupthink, which can be very scary and sounding, and like very condemning sounding. But if you think about it, it's something that places like a church can very easily fall into. Collective rationalization is one of the symptoms. Well, I should say groupthink, as I wrote on here, is a phenomenon that occurs when a group of well-intentioned people make irrational or non-optimal decisions spurred by the urge to conform or the belief that dissent is impossible. And how can that show up is where we're going with that. So collective rationalization is you might ignore or discount negative feedback that could make you consider your previous assumptions. So if somebody tells you, I think this church might not be welcoming to people of color, well, that's not true. Of course we're well. I mean, I would always say hello to anybody that came in, no matter what color they were. That rationalization that stops you from realizing, oh, maybe we do have some work to do. Maybe it's about more than whether or not you acknowledge their existence. Morality, believe unquestionably in your own morality. Stereotypes, you may have a negative or stereotypical view of your enemies. And I know I myself had experience with that many years ago now, 9 or 10 years ago, with a conversation I had with somebody who had some pretty strong feelings about the way the sanctuary was superior to the Journey worship community. Pressure, you'll see people apply direct pressure to an individual who momentarily expresses concern or doubt about the group's shared views. Members are not able to express their own individual arguments against the group. So if you have someone saying, I don't know, I really think Memorial Drive needs to do more about racism, and then you have a friend of yours, your Sunday school classmate, somebody you've known for 60 years says, well, no, I think we're doing fine. I don't think there's any, politics don't belong in the church setting. Well, then, are you really going to continue to speak out if you have trusted colleagues and friends kind of pulling you back in? So that turns into self-censorship. People avoid deviating from what the group consensus is and keep quiet. I have a feeling that many Memorial Drive members share our deep concern for racial justice, in that I see that in action with the people that come when we had grapple meetings, but I know many more are interested and maybe they aren't aware of the spaces in which they can speak out, which leads to the illusion of unanimity that we talked about.
Right. And Lynn, I think, if you don't mind going back to that slide real quick. And I'd be interested to get your and Victor's, kind of thoughts on this. One of the ways I see groupthink working out in the church setting is in what I would call kind of unexpressed shared values.
Yes.
So they're not completely written down, or these things, because what I would say is it's really hard to talk about, well, like you mentioned Journey worship and like sanctuary worship or different groups by Sunday school or whatever. In those groups, they're very vastly complex, lots of different people with lots of different thoughts about the world, about how they come together. And the overriding kind of assumed need is to kind of be congenial, like for everyone to get along and to be okay in some way. And then that leads to a groupthink that then kind of says, well, there are certain things that we can't really talk about or get into because there might be some disagreement, or authentic places of communication and conversation. And I think this is one of the reasons why conversations like this one, as well as opportunities for people to get in those smaller groups of 2, 3, and 4, to really be able to talk through some of how they see things and get on and make sure that they're being, being heard becomes really important. so that things are there. But I was curious about y'all's experience, because I don't think it's just that there's a general kind of group think that might be blanket wide MDUMC. My experience of it so far is that's certainly not how people present to me. Usually when they visit with me, they're deeply defined by their smaller subset within the broader whole. And I would say their kind of groupthink is this idea of trying to be congenial about all of it. Does that, I mean, and that's why they don't dive off into these deeper issues sometimes.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, what you're saying and what Liz is showing us,
Yeah.
I'm thinking in a way that it's already complicated with this type of group dynamic, and the differences as far as, generational, whether I like classic worship or I like contemporary worship, and that's within the confines of in this case, predominantly a white church. Well, I'm only thinking, here's another element being thrown in, where you have someone that's considered, whether it's subconscious or consciously, an outsider coming in, and that throws off a whole different, sort of group dynamic. So what do we do with this now? Because we're not familiar. It's almost like we know our interior differences, we know, but we're comfortable around each other because we look the same. We physically, we look the same, we think the same at a certain point, but then now you got this different culture coming in, and that kind of throws off the whole system, not knowing what to do with it. I mean, think about it. That's what came to mind. Some of my experience has been this, that I have to ease myself to assimilate to the group dynamic, and I have to adapt to it versus me being myself as much as I possibly can, that may have a different way of doing things or even thinking, but because I'm in what I would say borrowed space, then I have to, and I've learned this from I had to learn this from a corporate world when I worked in the corporate world, that I would try to become, in sort of my naive way, I would always come into the group, ask myself and who I am and the things that I do, including some of the things that I've polished over the years, the way I spoke. Maybe I was coming a little bit rougher on the edges with a bit of slang and things like that. And I quickly had to learn that was not going to be accepted in this space, right? And so then from there, I became sort of a chameleon of whatever spaces I was in. Then I had to simulate, or I had to implement myself to a certain point, just because of my personality. I still wear something a bit more authentic than the uniform that everybody wears, even if it is, in this particular space at church, very formal. There's certain things that I tweak for myself that just kind of give me a peace of mind that it's still me. But I had to learn all this throughout the years and throughout sort of life experiences, and in some cases, even embarrassment of somebody calling me out or trying to ridicule me because I did look different, or I had a slight way of pronouncing a certain word or a certain phrase. And so I think that's when, from an outsider's point of view, that's when you feel this, oh my goodness, I'm different according to these folks, even though I may not look like, I may not think that for myself. I'm just coming into the group, trying to involve myself, include myself. But then once that sort of, what are you doing kind of face is, or who are you, then you immediately realize, oh, I don't belong, that they don't think I'm a part of this, or I don't seem to be as equal, much less to even mention situations where I have to remind people that my voice counts. And I've been in situations, and especially in corporate America, where you had a white CEO or someone, or an executive interrupting my presentation, or interrupting what I had to say, based on maybe minimizing that, I didn't look like everybody else or what have you. And I had to remind the person, hey, I want to finish what I was saying, or I want to finish my point. And it's this kind of, anyways, I can see how complicated it gets to a group dynamic once you kind of throw in something different that they're not used to, that people are not used to in that constant world. And so that's been my experience, like I said, mostly coming from the outside.
Thank you for sharing that, Victor. I know that it's been said to you at Memorial Drive, thank you for not having an accent. And nobody means I don't like Mexicans when they say that, but the implication is you're more valued because the English that you speak is closer to the pronunciation that I'm familiar with, and thus you make me feel more comfortable, because it all goes back to self-image and self-identity again, because when we're by people who are like us, we are just constantly affirmed that the way that we do it is right. And we don't have to ask, that uncomfortable feeling when you're around somebody from another culture and you're not really sure, like, what if you meet a Muslim woman who wears a hijab and you're like, I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to offer to shake your hand, just that discomfort is a normal thing dealing with somebody who's from a different group than you. And, but it, where it becomes a discernible and unfortunate bias is when you avoid working with somebody like that because you don't want to be in a situation you don't know how to handle. And all of this also comes to our values, and values are such a deep determinant of our self-identity. So for when I would see the sanctuary versus the journey, it's like I have a deep value. Like my parents always taught me that to show respect to the Lord, I wear dress clothes on Sunday. And to me, you who are attending the journey in jeans are disrespecting our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and that's very upsetting to me. And that's that's an example of, that's a real thing that I have heard. And not to get into that, but that's where what if we have these differences in meeting style, like in an African-American culture, I've learned, not all, but in a lot of them, meetings are much less agenda driven and much more room driven. And so what does the room need? And do people have time to tell their stories and have their needs met? And so if we only get to one agenda item because we really deeply dove into that agenda item, or if we go, I've been attending a Black church and we go 2 hours solid, and that's not 2 hours of preaching. It's just because we're talking and deeply diving into these issues, and there's, if you, Dr. Morgan, or Pastor Brad, or whomever went for 2 hours, I can tell you that there will be a lot of discomfort in the sanctuary because we have, and that doesn't mean that church A and church B one is better or the other. It's just like what you value. And that's where we need to get past our group dynamics and start thinking. And to answer your question specifically, I think there's obviously in any large group going to be small subsections. And that's where problems can really become entrenched because of that's like the sub specialization of of how alike we are or how tied we are to the opinion of others. Like I might not care as much what a person who's very different than me thinks of me as much as I care about another person who's in the early 40s and has kids and, is a lot more like me. But I am going to get to, I promise, that it is important for us to develop a church culture that sets the tone that this is what Memorial Drive believes in all of its, I mean, we all have, how do we, I think you can appreciate that we can say that and there can still be nuance. We don't all have to vote for the same candidate to all agree that all human life is sacred and that Black lives matter, and that Black lives don't matter at the expense of other lives, that Black lives matter too. And that the reason that we can say that is because for so long it has seemed like Black lives do not matter. So we don't need to fight about whether all lives matter. Yes, all lives matter. And among the lives that matter are Black lives. So that kind of very heavily charges into the next point I wanted to make, which is that we have to remember that diversity reflects God's glory, and that we love Richard Rohr in this group, and he says, God has chosen to communicate God's very self in multitudinous and diverse shapes of beauty, love, truth, and goodness, each of which manifests another facet of the divine. And I also read a devotional on this psalm that I had to include. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. And we often hear that in one sort of political context, but setting that completely aside, think about every single person. Like George Floyd was knit by God inside his mother's womb, and it was fearfully and wonderfully made. And his life is immensely important to God, as is mine, as is Victor's, as is Pastor Brad's. And so when we think about like these people, they're not just people that we ought to be nice to. They're not just people that should be safe. It's like, these are people that are so precious to God, we can't even imagine it. And it is our call as a Christian to live, to demonstrate that.
Right. And if I might just echo on that,
Please,
I mean,
yes.
How to say, when we look at the book of Jonah too, I mean, it's part of what it is to be a follower of God from beginning to end, right? I mean, the Ninevites there, that God, Jonah gets so upset because God's going to save even them. I mean, they had a bridge in their downtown Nineveh, right? That was built out of the ivory of their enemies, out of their bones and skulls. And so, I mean, God, I mean, they're bad people. And even when our indignation and upsetness seems righteous, God reminds us that he loves everybody. Like I don't know how to break through that anymore, and that we have to somehow help the world, the rest of the world, as followers of Jesus, show the blessing of each person's diversity and gifts they bring to the table. Because it's not about trying to pretend as if we don't see race, or we don't see gender, or we don't see what's in front of us in different cultures. Instead, it's about seeing those things and responding out of the love of Christ in every situation. I mean, I think, and even learning that, oh, wow, somebody else does it differently. That's not a threat. That's a gift to our common humanity. I mean, maybe not the Assyrians. I'm still working on my forgiveness for them,
Thank you. Yeah.
really trying to find, and to really, since in my personal encounters that open their awareness to the movement of God in all kind of people's lives. Because I find when people, for people to be transformatively moved toward a deeper discipleship, if you will, is where I put this kind of understanding. We've got to help make sure it's clear that people of all ages, nations, and races are welcomed in our congregations and in our settings. And I do think you're right. Right now, that's not there. It is surfacely, and it wants to be, but it's not there yet. We've got to get that work going at a continual level.
Yeah.
Because that's why there are many reasons why we're still segregated on Sunday mornings, but we can go more into that, I think, as we get into our conversation.
Yeah. And so I'm just going to skip ahead because I know that I feel like we've covered this, and I know we're going to run short on time, and I want to hear your story. So I love that Christina doesn't just describe the problem, she prescribes a solution. And so what can this look like at a place like Memorial Drive, or any church or organization looking to change the dynamic and become the welcoming followers of Christ we want to be. So she talks about including unity goals in organizational purpose statements. And just to preface this, she used unity a lot in disunity in Christ. And that was 4 years ago, and the world is very different. The world is very different than it was 4 months ago, you know? And so today, I think that the point that someone like her and where our Black brothers and sisters want us to be is not just unity, but in really recognizing these deep structural racism issues that you are alluding to. But I took it out of the book, and I think unity is a place where we need to start. And there's no shame in starting as long as we commit to not stopping. So include unity goals and organizational purpose statements, preaching regularly on the topic, allocating significant organizational resources, addressing and correcting structural inequities in the church or organizational culture, offering seminars to equip congregants. It's a skill that you can learn. And that's important. I always say that developing multicultural leadership and then honoring the leadership of those that we bring in. I mean, I heard a suggestion that we do a pastor swap, and we send one of our white pastors to a Black church and bring a Black pastor into our church. And that's a good idea if we're able to accept, like Victor was saying, to accept that person in all their Blackness. If they have to be just sort of a Black person who speaks the way that we all speak, who worships the way we worship, who thinks about the Bible the way we think about it, who never brings up anything really ugly like police violence, then maybe they'll be okay. That's not true multiculturalism. That's just making ourselves feel better about what we're doing, and that's not what we're about here, right? And inviting different cultural voices to speak in the pulpit and elsewhere. And that is the end of my slideshow.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you, Brad, for the discussion points. It's so funny because I have all these notes and everything, but I love when that's why we do these conversations in such an organic way, because it's what prompts the presentation, what the discussion that it prompts is so valuable. So thank you so much for your point of view as well. And so I have a question for you that we did with Michael and Colin when they participated. And so the question is, what or who has helped you become more aware of how race and racism are at work in your life and your community?
Yeah. So the church was really the catalyst for me on issues of race. It was people like Robert Hayes Sr., Bishop Bob Hayes's father, and talking to our groups at church camp, as well as in our congregation setting to our youth group. It was members of our community. One woman, I remember her first name was Hilda, but I don't remember her last name off the top of my head. It's just not coming to me here in my older age now, but was trying to remember. She was a Holocaust survivor, and it really spoke volumes to us about the different ways that different groups of human beings treated one another. It really blessed us with a deeper awareness, even at a young age, to try to help us be more attuned and in line with attempting to be a part of the racial reconciliation of the world, and also too to see that a part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus is that you look out for those persons that the culture around you is excluding or leaving out or penalizing for no fault of their own. And that was a part of what it meant to be a follower of Jesus. The church was a major catalyst in my life and faith development. As I become a college student and be at the South Texas Methodist student movement, we would be a bridge between the Rio Grande Conference and the Southwest Texas Conference that eventually would be the forerunner of the Rio Texas Conference that would get formed. And I was the first non-Spanish speaking leader of that group. And it really taught me a lot about how to to listen to people, and the importance in a cross-racial or interracial kind of understanding of how to make decisions, that power needed to be shared, and be where each person out of their student ministry context and out of their background would have a way to fully participate in what was going on. And it involved just a lot of moving things toward where unanimous consent had to be reached before we could do things. That way everyone had to actually be listened to.
Yeah. I think what's powerful with your story is, and that's something that we've kind of have picked up in the God is Love theme, that our stories are powerful of leading ourselves to this change of heart, or this transformation, or enlightening, or awakening, however we want to label it, and then how it impacts our lives in an authentic way to lead a actual faithful life as a follower of Jesus. And so what you're telling us is exactly that there came this point of a breakthrough for you to evolve, to enhance, to grow, right, from what you were used to. And then I think the key, and this is again the theme that we're trying to help everybody that watches and listens to the God is Love series, is the willingness to be open, and the willingness to empty ourselves, and trust that God is leading us through these type of experience in order for us to really genuinely head to an authentic lifestyle where we are connecting with everyone in that we're carrying the image of God with everyone, and that we're recognizing that. And the group dynamic material that Liz shared with us today is the example of how easy and unintentional we can close ourselves up into just a small world. And your testimony, or your story right now that you're telling us, is an example of you lending yourself to that experience, that you gave yourself away to something that was not familiar to you, and it brought this other part of you that was already in you, but that you had not tapped into. And I think that to me, that's what I call actual transformation. And so one of the things that I encourage in this space is that we cannot stay stagnant in our faith walk. It has to be progressive. We continually have to be evolving. And so these stories, like yours, Colin, Michael's, Liz's story, my story, they fit that there was a point in our lives where we decided to step forward, and then that kind of brought momentum to this growth and this continuing maturity in our faith. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Right. Well, and Victor, if I could liken it, it's like, when you're being raised as a child, you're taught one set of assumptions and belief based out of what you grow up in. And I don't think we really should ever hold that against someone, because oftentimes it's of no fault of their own that they were raised in that environment. I mean, I'm thinking here specifically about pejorative terms I was taught as that were supposed to be normative or normal, and other things would be around jokes I heard. And at a certain level, those things quit becoming funny, because you realize the harm and what they do, and part of it's an expansion of our compassion, to then cause us to go, now hold on, if this system keeps producing these results, is there something about the system that needs to be adjusted or modified? Because we don't want to keep producing these results. We want to produce something different. And I believe the church can be a powerful catalyst for that. I think that is, if we can call it, the dream of the Unity Conference in '68, when the United Methodist Church came together. That was their hope, that we could really build something like the United Methodist Church that would be an important and essential component of bringing peoples of all different types together in ways that would be a blessing. And so, I really think it's a part of who we are as Methodists and United Methodist, and a part of our kind of basic basic DNA. You mentioned the image of God. Of course, one of Wesley's first sermons was called the image of God, and very much about the precious blessing of the image of God that's in each one of us. And it's very interesting that in those sermons and in the sermons of Wesley's, he is very intentional about not differentiating along race or class line.
Sure.
He's got a very inclusive understanding of who the image of God belongs to, and would call all of us beloved sacred children of God. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Liz, any closing thoughts or reflections?
I'm just very pleased to have got the chance to meet you, to hear your commitment to these very difficult discussions and the process, and just look forward to working with you in any way I can.
Yeah. To everyone else, thank you so much, Liz. Again, when you were giving us a presentation, I'm always writing notes down as I'm watching it. And this is what I got out of it. And thank you so much, because you simplify the explanations of something very complex, and that's the truth. But I think as believers of Christ, we are called to be involved and to be invested in restorative work. And the restoration is not just an outer work, it's inner work. And so for me, the combination, the beautiful combination that we have in this series is the education piece and then the spiritual piece. And so that's part of the restorative work. And so the movement is inward, right? It's what God's going to do with me, how God is going to confront me, how God is going to invite me in this education piece. And then the reflections that we all have shared of how God is connected to all this. Then what happens is that we become participants in our outer work, but we become participants to a major change in our society. And so that is the call. That is the call of change in the world. Of, Jesus did this revolution of a change of heart, a renewing of the mind, and that's exactly what we become participants of. So the movement is this encounter with God, allowing God's divine presence to move us and just evolve us, right? And invite us to evolve and trust that, because it's in his presence. And then we get to be participants of the great mission. And that transformation that's going inward, it starts to display in the outer work that we do. And I think that's what, to simplify it a bit. And so that's what I was thinking about as you were showing us your presentation, that although I may not mean to be cliquish, although I may not, my intention is not to, be excluded in just the way I do things and the way I'm used to it, but it does limit me. And so as soon as I open myself up, that there's some more that I'm being invited to experience, including others that don't look like me. My goodness, what a impacting way to lead life. We talk about having a meaningful life, that you get to be a participant of changing the world. And so that's what we're invited to. So I pray that all of you are encouraged by everything you've heard today and the presentation, Brad's story. And I can't thank you enough for being a part of this weekly conversation. And so continue to send us your feedback, your comments, your questions. And I thank you both again. Thank you, Liz, again. We'll see you next week.
Okay.
Brad, what an honor to have you here today.
Well, it's a joy and a blessing to be part of the conversation. And thank you for allowing me to participate. In any ways I can be supportive, please let me know.
Thank you so much. Well, we'll see you all next week. And I will grab that little movie clip that Liz shared with us, and I will post that on our comment area. So that way you guys can click on it, or if not, watch the movie. Watch
the whole movie. It's wonderful.
Yes, it's a great movie.
And I mean, Robin Williams was genius. So this is definitely Dead Poet Society is the name of the movie. And I'm sure you can find it in any of your stream services. So free plug for this movie. But anyways, thank you so much. See you all next week. Thank you again, guys. And we will talk to you guys soon.
We are so glad you joined us for this week's conversation. You're invited to leave any comments or questions in the comments below. I want to leave you with these encouraging words from Jesus from the Sermon of the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. We'll see you next time.